Whenever I see Prototype publish a visual novel, I'm convinced it's gonna be pretty good. And the more I play their published content, the more I realize they will also be huge time sinks. That's what happened when I trekked into a VN that came to the Switch not long ago. More of an isekai tale than the typical going to school story like Clannad. Let us dive into this tale of dragons, mermaids, and World War II pilots. Here is my review of Hatsumira from the future Undying for the Nintendo Switch. This story is centered around Ichiro, a member of the Japanese Air Forces during World War II. In the middle of a kamikaze mission, he awakens in a desert that he soon finds to be an entirely new world. He is saved by a young woman that can transform into a huge dragon and soon joins up with her resistance forces that are fighting with other demihumans like dogs, mermaids, and zombies to free the world from an oppressive society known as Wisla. Now the story here, I have a lot of different viewpoints on it. It's a very good story and you get so much character development for literally everyone. There are 4 heroines that have routes but a ton of other characters. The entire 384th Wyvern Air Squadron have no routes or dating options in this game, but you get to hear all of their backstories and spend so much time with them. My only thought was, so where's the game for Maureen, Carmine, Ellen, and Fran? And that brings me to the idea that this doesn't even feel that much like a dating sim. You could take out all of the intimacy stuff in this game and it would still work as a great story. And that's probably because you don't even get routes until you're over 30 to 35 hours into this game. As you meet different factions and characters over chapters 1 through 4, there are bits and pieces of intimacy, like Yukikaze criticizing and subtly trying to find out what Ichiro's type is, but it takes the way back seat to the actual plot behind the different races, politics, and the war itself. I mean, sure, there are some characters like Melty the mermaid that are constantly throwing out sexual innuendos, but even Ichiro acts self-aware that they need to keep things focused on the war and not Melty's constant advances. And that really isn't a bad thing. The game's story is very good. It dives into a lot of war politics and there are a ton of mirrors and references to Japan's stance and reactions to many aspects of World War II. It's also a gigantic story. When I finished the game, I felt like I'd just gone through several seasons of a TV series. Each chapter introduces a race like the dogs and mermaids and you spend the better part of 9 to 10 hours with each of them, going over how they're introduced, learning their history, and helping them overcome obstacles and rivalries. You could have made this game into 4 or 5 different visual novels, and it still would have worked fine as each chapter has a concrete resolution with the characters it's about. The main hurdle people have about this game is its main character. Ichiro is pretty much the opposite of what you think of as a visual novel protagonist. He has a face that is shown in CG events. There are very few dialogue choices, so people are really seeing his story rather than inserting themselves into the plot. And he is a brash military man that punches first and asks questions later, especially in the early hours of the game. But if you don't mind the change of pace and confrontational nature of his character, he does develop rather well across the adventure and it isn't totally out of place in a world that is at war. Though if you ask me, the main problem with this story is the lack of routes for the 384th Squadron. I find it almost criminal for you to spend so much time with them only for them to not have their own routes. When it comes to gameplay, this is a visual novel with very light dialogue choices built in. As you play through, you'll advance and experience the story, gaining dialogue choices once you reach the point where you can choose a route and heroine to focus on. But as you'd expect, Hatsumira on Nintendo Switch is not the 18+ version that Steam users can download a patch to unlock. So all the sex scenes with the heroines are removed, at least in a way. These scenes don't really affect the main plot at all and are really just little moments in the heroine routes. But this game doesn't cut them out of the story entirely or transform them into kissing scenes. To give an example, one of Melty's H scenes has lead up and kissing, and then it just fades to the next morning with Ichiro talking about her giving herself to him. Essentially giving the player the motion that yes, they did make love, we're not trying to hide the fact that they actually did have sex, we just didn't see it happening. But past that, this is a typical VN of this style. Like with Clannad and Grisaya Trilogy's Nintendo Switch ports, you have touchscreen gestures to be able to play this game without any buttons. Options to do auto and skip with ease, jumping back in the script if you miss something. There are just a ton of little convenience options built in that make it very easy to relax and watch. And relaxing and watching is something to talk about. This game does have dialogue choices, 2 in total. Once you get into the default Yukikaze route, you get a choice towards the end to dictate which ending you get, and once you clear it, you earn a dialogue choice back in Chapter 4 to go on any of the heroine's routes. Thankfully, you don't need to replay the entire game to gain access to this. Once you get the Yukikaze clear data, you can just reload from the end of Chapter 3 and you'll get the new dialogue for route choice and go into the others at your leisure. And that's a good thing because this game is a beast of a time sink. You have 4 chapters that essentially serve as this game's common route. It took me the better part of 8 to 10 hours for each of these chapters, and I didn't get onto the initial Yukikaze route until I'd been playing the game for almost 40 hours. And it was around 50 by the time I'd gotten my first ending and gone to try the routes for Isla, Ria, and Melty. So be ready for a long tale. And now let's go on to presentation. Visually, the game looks nice, all of the artwork is done well and crisp. We don't get animated renders and models like Song of Memories has, but it does look very good and there are loads of CG event scenes to unlock and view later on. The only issue I had with presentation and performance was with the auto advance feature. A few times during my adventure, it would reach points where the auto advance would randomly just stop working. It would keep itself engaged, but it wouldn't go forward. It never happened at the same time though. Whenever I would go back to places it's happened before, it would advance without issue. Granted, only happening a few times across 50 hours isn't that bad, but it happened enough to be a consistent issue. That's all I got for performance, so let's go into battery life. Hatsumira will give the original and light models a battery range of 4.5 to 6 hours, while the V2 and OLED models get 7 to 9 hours. In conclusion, Hatsumira is a gigantic isekai adventure with a ton of races and a Japanese pilot far out of his element. Now on the downside, the auto advance function will sometimes stop working and we don't get routes for some of the most fleshed out characters in this game. But if the main downside of a story being that there aren't more routes for side characters, you've got something that's pretty good. Reviews to Go rates Hatsumira from the future Undying for the Nintendo Switch a 9 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.